Okay, ladies and germs, Dr. Hoplite seeing patients today. Yes, I'm administering knowledge boosters, which are both safe and effective. So thank you for coming in today for this third part of our four-part series, COVID-19, the Great Reset. Yeah, so we're back again. I apologize. I've just been caught up and busy, hiatus after hiatus, but you're back, I'm back. We're going to get through this very tedious book, but yeah, I appreciate you coming back for part 3. If you're coming here from parts 1 and 2, we're going to jump right into these readings for this episode to try to move things along. I noticed the episode's been over an hour, so hopefully you're putting this on in the background, you're listening to me read or wax philosophic or just, spout an opinion, and it's helping you pass the day. But anyway, I still think that this book is very important for what's going on in our day and age. They will probably teach this period of history with this book as part of the contextual reference as to what was going on and why it was going on. The book itself, as you probably know from parts 1 and 2, has very little to do with COVID and is more to do with managing people in the midst of a pandemic or a worldwide catastrophe, which might be happening right now, by the way, with SVB Bank and Signature Bank. We could be witnessing the debt and mortgage crisis 2.0 for 2023, although in 2008 it was the housing crisis. Looks like it will be a banking crisis for 2023, which will obviously cascade into all the other markets, including housing and real estate. But anyway, that'll be a topic for a different video. Today, as I said, we're going to get into part 3 of COVID-19, the Great Reset. And as I did in the second part, we went through the timeline of 2020. So we're going to go through a little bit of the timeline of 21, which I remember was a god-awful year. I really have done my best to try to block out my memories from 2021 because it was pretty crappy. But anyway, here's a quick timeline. I don't even go all the way through the year because, like I said, I just want to block it out. But January 18th of 21, the CDC said that the death toll for COVID exceeded 400,000 people, which again, like COVID's not even endemic in the US for even a year yet, and they're already counting deaths, which I throw the BS flag on. But moving on, January 21st, a historic day. President Joe Biden is inaugurated to a crowd of roughly 500 people, I believe, in Washington, D.C., after winning the 2020 election by securing 81 million legitimate individual votes, the most of any president in U.S. history. That's right. And there was some confusion on the night of the election. I believe like 45 of all states in the union had called their election the night of, but the 5 swing states that were previously carried by Donald Trump in 2016, they didn't quite know who had won yet. But then after a couple days or even a week or so of counting the votes, they said, yeah, Joe flipped all 5 states, which was historic, right? Flips 5 swing states, 81 million legitimate popular votes. Joe Biden's inaugurated, 500 people show up on the National Mall to celebrate. And then he reverses the Trump admin's plan to withdraw the U.S. from the World Health Organization, which I believe today is March 13th, 2023. The World Health Organization still doesn't quite know the origins of COVID-19. They're working on it, though. They said they're working around the clock to find out where COVID-19 came from and how this all happened, which is their job. So it's been about 3 years now, so they might just might need another week or two. Anyway, laying the sarcasm on pretty hard tonight, folks. I bet you can tell. January 25th to 26th, a COVID gamma variant is identified, which means COVID has already gone through enough people in the world to mutate into a new variant. Some people might ask, well, why am I getting a vaccine for something that is already mutated? That's a good question. Why would you get a vaccine that is already mutated? because it means enough people have already been sick with it, cleared it, and it's mutated to basically survive. Don't know either. Why would you get a vaccine for something that's clearly mutating? Because that vaccine is not going to cover you for that. But we move on to February 18th. Estimated 2.5 million women and 1.8 million men leave the U.S. workforce. So it looks like COVID had a harder impact on female workers than male workers. Probably because male workers are in essentially what we consider mandatory jobs. Like someone has to purify the water, someone has to pick up the trash, somebody has to make sure the infrastructure keeps working, because then everything breaks down if someone doesn't show up to do that job. February 27th, 2021, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine gets emergency use authorization designation. So J&J is late to the money party. They come out with their vaccine and they finally get approval from, I believe, the CDC and the FDA at the end of February of 21. March 13th of 21, 100 million COVID vax doses have been now administered in the United States. Again, Gamma variant identified. COVID's obviously circulating through the population enough times to mutate. 100 million people have at least gotten one dose for something that is now changed form. March 19th, CDC says, I love this one. I don't remember this, but I actually looked this up. March 19th, the CDC says K through 12 schools can social distance to 3 feet versus 6 feet. Right. So this doesn't sound arbitrary at all, right? It's like, well, we got to socially distance because COVID's a thing, 6 feet minimum. Not even, roughly a year later, we reduced it to 3 feet. Like the COVID virus is going to know that, we're onto it now, right? 6 feet, right? But now it's 3 feet because we're catching up to you. So kids, it's okay. You can talk to your friends, but 3 feet minimum, right? We're relaxing the 6 foot thing, which was dumb to begin with. It just sounded dumb even back in 20 and 20 and 21 and 2020 when I heard it. It was like 6 feet, like that's gonna change anything. We were so dumb to believe that crap. All right, 3 feet. Okay, thanks CDC. Jumping to April 13th, CDC and FDA recommend a pause on the J&J shots due to blood clot issues. So here we go. We got April 13th, J&J shot bad, but February 27th, J&J shot okay. Wouldn't you feel kind of stupid if you got the J&J shot in the month of March? And then in mid-April, the CDC and the FDA say, oh yeah, hold on a second. We're seeing some blood clot issues with the J&J vaccine. We might want to put a timeout on that. Yeah, what about the people who got the J&J vaccine in this, 35, 40 days? Sucks to be them, I guess, right? Good luck with the blood clots if you get one. June 1st, we jump to COVID Delta variant identified in India. So it's mutated a second time. And I like they call these variants like by Gamma and Delta, like it sounds so official, like a military designation. I remember when they identified the variant in India, they were calling it the Indian variant. And everyone said, well, that's racist. It's like, no, that's just where the variant was identified. If it was identified in, Iowa, we'd be calling it the Iowa variant. But it's like, well, we can't say it's the Indian variant because, racism. But I look at that like a good thing. Delta was a variant of COVID identified in India. That means enough Indians had gotten sick with the original COVID or even Gamma that it mutated again to Delta. So this thing is already mutating faster than any of these vaccines or boosters can keep up with it. And once we had Delta, you could maybe say Gamma was a fluke, but Delta's like, all right, well, you will never be boosted enough to catch up with this stuff. Every time this thing mutates, you will have to go in and get reboosted, which means, you're going to be making your doctor a lot of money and the pharmaceutical companies a lot of money because they could just announce like new variant identified in Kuala Lumpur. 5 people there had it, so it's a variant now. Go get your, I don't know, your Epsilon variant booster. I'm sure a lot of people would actually think that's kind of neat. I got my Epsilon booster today. And then August 11th, CDC releases a statement that COVID vaccine is safe for pregnant and nursing mothers. And I stopped on that one because I didn't want to remember anymore 21, but I believe Pfizer came out in a statement earlier this year in 2023, that as it turns out, they discontinued their study of their Pfizer BioNTech vaccine in pregnant and nursing mothers, which means their study is inconclusive, which means there's no reliable data for what a pregnant mother or nursing mother or the infant would be at risk for by getting a vaccine while the woman's pregnant or nursing. So good luck with that. But CDC, way back in 2021, first or second week of August, was saying, no, that's fine. You can get a COVID vaccine. Yeah, AstraZeneca, J&J, Pfizer, it's all good. Pfizer 2 years later, almost a year and a half later, says, yeah, about that study, we never actually finished it. We kind of, called it good. So we don't really have like what you would call a complete data set so that you can say one way or another. So for all the pregnant women that were getting vaccinated in August 21 and henceforth, good luck. Good luck to you. Good luck for the J&J folks, and good luck for the pregnant nursing mothers who signed up for the vaccine believing the CDC that it was safe and they had the data. Which they definitely didn't, because there's just not enough time. And that should have been another red flag, is they're coming out literally with the virus being in the country for a year and change, and they're already saying the vaccine is safe for pregnant nursing mothers. It's wild. Anyway, let's get to the book itself, shall we? COVID-19 Great Reset, Klaus Schwab. And this is part 3, so we will pick up where we left off in the earlier segments. This is still under the macro reset, page 122. The subject of this passage is China as a winner. This should be good. And Mr. Schwab wrote, the argument of those who claim that the pandemic crisis has benefited China while exposing the weakness of the U.S. is threefold. 1, it has made the American strength as the world's most prominent military power irrelevant in the face of an invisible and microscopic enemy. In the words of the American academic who coined the expression, it hurt the U.S. soft power because of the incompetence of its response. An important caveat, the issue of whether a public response to COVID-19 was competent or incompetent has given rise to a myriad of opinions and provoked much disagreement. Yet it remains difficult to pass judgment. In the U.S., for example, the policy response was to a large extent the responsibility of states and even cities. Hence, in effect, there was no national U.S. policy response as such. What we're discussing here are subjective opinions that shaped public attitudes. And 3, it's exposed aspects of American society that some may find shocking, like the deep inequalities in the face of the outbreak, the lack of universal medical coverage, and the issue of systemic racism raised by the Black Lives Matter movement. All these prompted Kishore Mahbubani, an influential analyst of the rivalry that opposes the U.S. and China, to argue that COVID-19 has reversed the roles of both countries in terms of dealing with disasters and supporting others. While in the past the U.S. has always been the first to arrive with aid where assistance was needed, like on December 26, 2004, when a major tsunami hit Indonesia, this role now belongs to China, he says. In March 2020, China sent to Italy 31 tons of medical equipment, ventilators, masks, and protective suits that the EU could not provide. In his opinion, the 6 billion people who compose the rest of the world and live in 191 countries have already begun preparing themselves for the U.S.-China geopolitical contest. Mahbubani says that it is their choices that will determine who wins the rivalry contest and what these will be based on the cold calculus of reason to work out cost-benefit analysis of what both the U.S. and China have to offer them. Okay, so here we are in the middle of this book, and we're talking about China and the U.S. versus each other on a geopolitical stage. Nothing to do with COVID-19. I mean, well, something to do with COVID-19, but like it's a bigger picture segment. And it's funny he says that it made America's strength as the world's most prominent military power irrelevant. Like, yeah, so I guess what you're saying is that you could somehow equate this to a bioweapon, as in this virus, which we definitely know originated in China, right? In Wuhan, in the city of Wuhan, in a particular district, right down the street from a level 4 bioweapons facility. We know that, right? But maybe came from a wet market, but there's a level 4 bioweapons research facility right down the street from that same wet market, made the US military and its preeminence, irrelevant. Yeah, I guess a worldwide bioweapon would do that to any world power at any time in history. I guess that much is true. And in the words of the American academic coined the expression, the U.S. soft power because of the incompetence of its response. And here he says, in the U.S., for example, the policy response was to a large extent the responsibility of states and cities. No, it wasn't. Like, look at this timeline. This is the CDC timeline. I went to their website. They're saying they did all this stuff. They're the ones administering the vaccines, right? They're the ones that are drafting legislation to spend hundreds of millions and then later billions of dollars for masks and lockdown measures and vaccines and sanitary equipment. This was a massive federal response. Now, of course, they did it on the backs of the U.S. taxpayer, but a lot of states, implemented their plans strictly because it coincided with the federal plans, because the states wanted the federal aid, so they had to play ball to, get money. And that's always been the name of the game, right? If you want to get along, you have to go along. And that's what states did. But it was definitely a federal-driven machine, like from day one, from the get-go, even back to the Trump administration. And then third, exposes the aspects of American society that some might find shocking, including the lack of universal medical coverage, which again, if you want universal basic income and you want universal, basic health care in America, you basically are saying we're a communist country. And if we're a communist country, no one's going to want to live here for very long, because you have over 330 million people that are going to say, why do I work this hard if I'm going to get paid this much no matter what? Why do I take care of myself when I can just go get free health care? Why don't I just go get free health care for any little thing under the sun? Like, it'll ruin this country. It just will. No one wants to admit that. Everyone just thinks of the positives that would come from universal health care, but they never think of how are you going to manage that logistically? And then systemic racism raised by BLM, no offense, Klaus, but you're talking out of your ass. That has nothing to do with COVID. And if it did, we wouldn't have, like I said in part 2, we wouldn't have allowed the riots of 2020 to go on, because it was predominantly minorities, Black and Hispanics, who were out in the streets rioting, looting, committing crimes, and doing it in groups of dozens, if not hundreds of people. So if we really cared about these people, would we permit them to congregate and riot and potentially spread what is ostensibly the most deadly pandemic mankind has faced in centuries? No, we wouldn't. So this whole systemic racism stuff is just, it's absolute crap. It's a distraction. So yeah, but China is definitely on the march, and they look at the United States as basically disarmed when it comes to pandemics, because China's willing to do things to its population and its people that the United States, well, its government probably dreams about, fantasizes about, but would never really try to do and implement in real life. China will just do it. China will literally lock you in your apartment for days on end. China will refuse to let you drive down a street unless you have authorization. China will give you a social credit, meaning you will be in a social credit system, and you will get social credits based upon your compliance with the system. The U.S. is kind of far away from doing that. It might occur in the future, but from right now, it's pretty much China playing that game, and that's what they do. That's how they treat their people. So yeah, if you want to lock down a country and subject people to, just awful conditions, yeah, China's the place that can do that. So what? Do they really win the game in a sense? I guess, they win the game in how much they're able to get away with what they subject their people to. But after a while, when people just have enough and have nothing left to lose, you have created such pain and misery and poverty among these people that they'll just tear the place apart, and they'll tear you apart with it. And I think the Chinese, I won't like it's an interesting case, China, because it's very, very different from the U.S. But I can tell you, if they tried to do what they do in China to U.S. citizens, there would be revolt probably within that year, like a full-on revolt, not this fake January 6th stuff, by the way. Okay, moving on. Page 124, the U.S. as a winner. Okay, let's read this chapter. Page 124. Klaus said, the dollar's domination as a global currency used in trade and perceived as a safe haven remains largely unchallenged for the moment. This translates into considerable geopolitical power, enabling the U.S. authorities to exclude companies and even countries like Iran or Venezuela from the dollar system. As we saw in the preceding chapter, this may change in the future, but over the next few years, there is no alternative to the world's dominance of the U.S. dollar. More fundamentally, proponents of irreducibility will argue with Richir Sharma that U.S. economic supremacy has repeatedly proved declinists wrong. Yeah, well, that one, this chapter is not too convincing either. The U.S. dollar's domination as a global reserve currency is currently being challenged, and it looks like it will not remain the world's reserve currency much longer. The war in Ukraine has showed us that despite what the Western media tells you, Russia is not isolated. Russia has a lot of powerful allies, and those allies have a large portion of the world's population, which means their gross domestic products combined together rivals that of the Western nations. I'm talking about Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa. Now we're looking at possibly Saudi Arabia and Nigeria and Iran. If you keep adding these places up, like it gets pretty obvious that the US dollar will no longer enjoy the hegemony it had over all of the other world's currencies for the past, 55 some years. That is going away. Now the US, because of our gross domestic product, will always be a world power. That's not to say that the US dollar will go away or that it won't be valuable, but as a world reserve currency, as in the world literally lives and dies by the US dollar, like that probably will be going away, and we are entering a multipolar world. And just to plug my own stuff, if you go to my playlist for the Ukraine war series, I explain like how that's basically being systematically dismantled by Russia, China, India, and the BRICS nations as we speak. And it's going to happen a lot sooner than people think, I believe, as well. All right, let's move on. Jump to page 128. We're still under the macro reset section. Klaus wrote, for all these reasons, it is almost a tautology to state that the damage inflicted by the pandemic to fragile and failing states will be much deeper and longer lasting than in the richer and most developed economies. It will devastate some of the world's most valuable communities. In many cases, economic disaster will trigger some form of political instability and outbreaks of violence because the world's poorest countries will suffer from two predicaments. First, the breakdown in trade and supply chains caused by the pandemic will provoke immediate devastation like no remittances or increased hunger. And second, further down the line, they will endure a prolonged and severe loss of employment income. This is the reason why the global outbreak has such potential to wreak havoc in the world's poorest countries. It is there that economic decline will have an even more immediate effect on societies. Across large swaths of sub-Saharan Africa in particular, but also in parts of Asia and Latin America, millions depend on a meager daily income to feed their families. Any lockdown or health crisis caused by coronavirus could rapidly create widespread desperation and disorder, potentially triggering massive unrest with global knock-on effects. The implications will be particularly damaging for all those countries caught in the midst of a conflict. For them, the pandemic will inevitably disrupt humanitarian assistance and aid flows. It will also limit peace operations and postpone diplomatic efforts to bring the conflicts to an end. Okay, I'm going to throw the BS flag on that entire section. What did I get done saying towards the end of the timeline here, right? COVID Delta variant is identified in India. India is a densely populated country. If you've ever been to India, you will probably smell things there that you didn't ever think you'd ever smell in your life. There will be less than sanitary conditions while you visit the cities of India. Just a fact of life. No offense to the Indian folks out there, but India is a densely populated sewer. It's very dirty. It's very poor in a lot of areas. The COVID variant, which we later called Delta to spare the Indians' feelings, happened because these people weren't locking down. They weren't shutting themselves in like the Western countries. They weren't going out and getting vaccinated and boosted. Same thing in sub-Saharan Africa, right? If they were, and they were doing everything the West was doing, how come the death toll kept getting reported in the Western nations, but you weren't seeing like the body bags stacking up in countries like continents like Africa and countries like India and Southeast Asia? It's because those countries just do what they always do. It's like people are going to get sick, people are going to die, people are going to be born, people are going to grow up, and it's going to start all over again. And they just got on with life. They did the best they could with the resources they had, but they just, put their heads down and, pushed through it. And these variants that popped up are a result of natural immunity dealing with COVID, people getting over it, and then starting a new variant, which is probably less deadly but more transmissible, just like the cold or flu. And that's what it became. So this idea that the poor countries were just going to devolve into chaos because the supply chains were being disrupted from the Western countries because the Western countries were shutting down. The people in these poor countries were still getting up and going to work and trying to put together enough money to put food on the table. They weren't shutting down like the West was. So it was the Western countries that created those conditions. It wasn't COVID and it wasn't anything they were doing. And those countries, ironically enough, the poorest ones probably fared the best as far as death toll. Now, they have their death toll as it comes to other diseases and ailments is probably far higher simply because they just don't have the infrastructure to treat these people. But for something like COVID, it's just one more thing that you're just going to have to, deal with. And they dealt with it. All right, moving on. Jump to page 137. This is under the section Coronavirus and the Environment. Okay, 136 rather. And Klaus wrote, "The causality problem is easy to grasp as the reasons that make respective policies so much more difficult to implement. In the case of the pandemic, the causation link between the virus and the disease is obvious. SARS-CoV-2 causes COVID-19. Apart from a handful of conspiracy theorists, nobody will dispute that. In the case of environmental risks, it is much more difficult to attribute direct causality to a specific event. Often, scientists cannot point to a direct link of causation between climate change and a specific weather event, like a drought or the severity of a hurricane. Similarly, they don't always agree about how specific human activity affects particular species facing extinction. This makes it incredibly more difficult to mitigate climate change and nature loss risks. While for a pandemic, a majority of citizens will tend to agree with the necessity to impose coercive measures, they will resist constraining policies in the case of environmental risks when the evidence can be disputed. A more fundamental reason also exists. Fighting a pandemic does not require a substantial change of the underlying socioeconomic model and of our consumption habits. Fighting environmental risk does." Okay, so what is he trying to get to that? In this section, what point is he trying to get to? Is that, well, you know what? Like, you have to look at climate change and all that the same way you look at a pandemic. You changed your life all around for a pandemic, right? Because you had, skin in the game. It was you were going to get sick and die, or your kids were going to get sick and die, or their friends were going to get sick and die, unless you stayed home and watched Netflix and got takeout and took a COVID test every time you decided to go for a walk. Like, you did that for yourself and for your community, so why won't you do the same thing for the climate? It's funny, though, he says that scientists cannot point to a direct link of causation between climate change and a specific weather event. Well, that's interesting, because you would think they could if the two were related. But the fact is they're not. But I'll save that for a different episode. But what he wants to do is he wants to get you in this mode of thinking that The climate is as important as COVID. COVID is a threat to the human race just as much as, carbon dioxide and fossil fuels are. So you have to look at COVID and climate change in the same, lens, and basically give up your life because we have to save the climate. Like I said, this book is maybe 15 to 20% about like the actual COVID-19 pandemic. And it's written in 2020 while it's going on. Okay, let's jump to page 145. This is under Enlightened Leadership. Klaus wrote, "Some leaders and decision makers who were already at the forefront of the fight against climate change may want to take advantage of the shock inflicted by the pandemic to implement long-lasting and wider environmental changes. They will, in effect, make good use of the pandemic by not letting the crisis go to waste. The exhortation of different leaders ranging from His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales to Andrew Cuomo to, quote, build back better goes in that direction. So does a dual declaration made by the IEA with Dan Jorgensen, Minister for Climate, Energy and Utilities of Denmark, suggesting that clean energy transitions could help kickstart economies. Around the world, leaders are getting ready now, drawing up massive economic stimulus packages. Some of these plans will provide short-term boosts. Others will shape infrastructure for decades to come. We believe by making clean energy an integral part of their plans, governments can deliver jobs and economic growth while also ensuring their energy systems are modernized, more resilient, and less polluting. Governments, led by enlightened leaders, will make their stimulus packages conditional upon green commitments. They will, for example, provide more generous financial conditions for companies with low-carbon business models." Okay, now we're cutting to the quick, okay? Listen, the pandemic sucks. We're sorry. Get your vaccine, get your booster, get your second booster. But all that aside, the second issue, which is the more important issue, is climate change. Okay, folks? You get it? COVID sucks, all right? It's endemic. But we're going to put you through a series of changes. And you're going to get used to these changes. They will become the new normal. And then we will usher you into a new way of thinking, a new way of life. And then we'll just do the same thing with our climate policies, our green energy policies that we did to you with COVID. So it'll almost be seamless. Like it'll just be like another thing you have to do, but it won't be any different from what we made you do through COVID, right? We'll put more restrictions on you. This is how you slowly boil the frog, right? You put the frog in lukewarm water and you just turn it up degree by degree by degree, and it's boiling and he's dead. If you toss him in a boiling pot, he'll jump out and it's no good. You got to put him in lukewarm water. But it's interesting in this passage, he mentions that some leaders will use the shock inflicted by the pandemic to make good use of the pandemic by not letting the crisis go to waste. Where have you heard that before? Or where have I heard that before? That was something said by Rahm Emanuel, who I believe was the chief of staff for Barack Obama during his first term. He said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that was mostly like in the housing crisis of 2008, 2009. Never let a good crisis go to waste. This is how these people think, right? They're opportunists. They're sharks. If there's blood in the water, they will follow it and they will feast. He says something else too. Different leaders ranging from the Prince of Wales, who's now, the King of England, and Andrew Cuomo, who hasn't been treated very kindly in the last year or so, to, quote, build it back better, goes in that direction. The exhortation of different leaders ranging from the Prince of Wales to Andrew Cuomo to build it back better. This book is written in June of 2020. President Joe Biden, who again, 81 million legitimate votes, don't doubt that for a second. You're a conspiracy theorist if you do. What was his campaign slogan? Build back better, right? That was his what was Obama's? Hope and change, which is, that even sounds dumber, but hope and change was Barack Obama's. Make America Great Again was Donald Trump's, and Joe's was Build Back Better. Klaus wrote Build It Back Better in this book in June of 2020, right? Which would have been right in the midst of the campaign for the election of 2020 in November, which would have been November. There are no coincidences, folks, right? Like these things just don't like fall out of the sky and just happen. Well, wow, like build back better, right? I guess. What are the odds? Yeah, exactly. But yeah, this is all a push to get you conditioned into accepting green energy policies, right? Yeah, we know you like your suburban car. Yeah, it's rough and rugged, and it's got four-wheel drive, and you can fit the whole clan in there and drive them up to the cabin, for that weekend at the lake. But you know what? It's not good for the environment. So we're going to give you a electric car that you will have to charge overnight if you want to get 200 miles out of it, and it only seats 4. Sorry about that. You'll just have to buy 2. They're going to condition you into accepting less and less. They're going to restrict your movement. They're going to restrict how far your money can go or where it can go, and they're going to limit the products you're allowed to consume. But don't worry, it'll be like lockdown again, right? You just can't go here. You can't go there. But if you want to go inside, you got to wear a mask and you got to stay 6 feet away. And if you want to fly, you might have to get a vaccine, right? This is all conditioning. This is to get you to accept new normals so we can build back better, right? You get it. All right, let's move on. Page 154, the consumer. Klaus wrote, during the lockdowns, many consumers previously reluctant to rely too heavily on digital applications and services were forced to change their habits almost overnight, watching movies online instead of going to the cinema, having meals delivered instead of going to restaurants, talking to friends remotely instead of meeting them in the flesh, talking to colleagues on a screen instead of chit-chatting at a coffee machine, exercising online instead of going to the gym, and so on. Thus, almost instantly, most things became e-things, e-learning, e-commerce, e-gaming, e-books, e-attendance. Some of the old habits will certainly return. The joy and the pleasure of personal contacts can't be matched. We are social animals after all. But many of the tech behaviors that we were forced to adopt during confinement will, through familiarity, become more natural. As social and physical distancing persists, relying more on digital platforms to communicate or work or seek advice or order something will little by little gain ground on formerly ingrained habits. In addition, the pros and cons of online versus offline will be under constant scrutiny through a variety of lenses. If health considerations become paramount, we may decide, for example, that a cycling class in front of a screen at home doesn't match the conviviality and fun of doing it in a group in a live class, but is safer and cheaper. The same reasoning applies to many different domains like flying to a meeting. Zoom is safer, cheaper, greener, and more convenient. Driving to a distant family gathering for the weekend, the WhatsApp family group is not as fun, but again, safer, cheaper, greener. Or even attending an academic course, not as fulfilling, but cheaper and more convenient. Okay, again, I like how he used the example of driving the family to a vacation destination or flying, but you know what? Zoom, cheaper, safer, greener. This is how they will build it back better, right? They will convince you that it's cheaper and it's safer and it's greener, which means you're doing something for humanity as a whole, which that in and of itself is its own gift, right? You're saving your own money, you're keeping you and your family safe, and you're doing it to make the place greener. But what the hell is that going to matter if you're not going to go out and actually see what's green? If you're inside, glued to your TV screen, on your Peloton or on your Zoom meeting, or having your family gathering over Thanksgiving through your smart TV, the world outside is getting greener, but who the hell's enjoying it? You're all cooped up inside because this is the new normal, right? This is meant to atomize you. This is meant to destroy your sense of community, right? This is supposed to whittle you down to individual cells, because individual cells are easier to eliminate than a host of cells that have coalesced around, one idea or, one motivating force. It's divide and conquer. You are being divided and you're going to be conquered because it'll be cheaper, safer, and greener for you to live that way. And most people will go along with it. They absolutely will. Some are going along with it right now. I don't like to consider them my fellow countrymen because I think that's abhorrent. Anyway, let's continue. Page 160. Klaus says, the most effective form of tracking or tracing is obviously the one powered by technology. It not only allows backtracking all the contacts with whom the user of a mobile phone has been in touch, but also tracing the user's real-time movements, which in turn affords the possibility to better enforce a lockdown and to warn other mobile users in the proximity of the carrier that may have been exposed or had someone infected. It comes as no surprise that digital tracing has become one of the most sensitive issues in terms of public health, raising acute concerns about privacy around the world. In the early phases of the pandemic, many countries, mostly in East Asia, but others like Israel, decided to implement digital tracing under different forms. They shifted from the retroactive tracing of chains of past contagion to the real-time tracking of movements in order to confine a person infected by COVID-19 and to enforce subsequent quarantines or partial lockdown. From the outset, China, Hong Kong, SAR, and South Korea implemented coercive and intrusive measures of digital tracing. They took the decision to track individuals without their consent through their mobile and credit card data and even employed video surveillance in South Korea. In addition, some economies required the mandatory wearing of electronic bracelets for travel arrivals and people in quarantine in Hong Kong SAR to alert those individuals susceptible of being infected. Others opted for middle ground solutions where individuals placed in quarantine are equipped with a mobile phone to monitor the location and be publicly identified should they breach the rules. Right, so this is now getting into the dystopian territory, right? It's like, well, South Korea, China, Hong Kong, and I think Israel did all this stuff where they were tracking people in live time via their cell phone and their credit cards, which is a surveillance state, right? Today it's COVID-19, tomorrow it might be because you're a political dissident, or you have revolutionary thoughts, or you think that in the United States, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is the supreme law of the land, and people have the right to be secure in their papers, persons, and effects, which means you don't track me unless you have probable cause. And you have to get probable cause signed off by a magistrate judge or higher via a warrant to do any of that stuff. But in places like Hong Kong and China, the state doesn't care. The state doesn't have to do any of that. They don't have to jump through those hoops. They just say, yeah, we think this guy's sick. Well, follow him around town. And they will just track you with facial recognition software. They will see where you run your credit card. And if you step out of your lane, your boundaries, they'll just come and scoop you up and toss a black bag over your head and throw you in a van. Yeah, they did that. You know who else kind of did that? Was Australia. And I was so disgusted and upset with what the Australian people allowed their government to do to them. They straight up had COVID camps. And I want to say they even called them that, where if you were unvaccinated and if you broke quarantine, like you wanted to go down the street and like see your girlfriend for 5 minutes, they would straight up arrest you and like render you to these like trailer park COVID camps and monitor you until they felt you were, safe to return back into the general population. It was straight out of George Orwell's 1984, what parts of Australia were doing. And the fact that the people put up with it that long it's disheartening. But towards the end, you could see the Aussies definitely got pissed off enough where they were shaming cops in public and shouting at them. People were getting out of their chairs and screaming at these cops like, you're tyrants. You are the henchmen of tyrants. You should be ashamed of yourself. And a lot of these cops just hung their head and looked at the ground and walked away because that was exactly what they were. They were the henchmen of tyrants that were going out and finding people that were being illegally, in my opinion, tracked and traced so that they can scoop them up, arrest them because, maybe they're sick with COVID, they're infecting other people. Never mind the fact that once something is in your country and it spreads to, I think the number is maybe 5 or 10 people, it's just going to exponentially spread from there. Once you have contagion past a certain area and 10 people have it, well, 100 people are going to get it. And if 100 people get it, well, 1,000 people are going to get it. And if 1,000 get it, then 10,000, then 100,000, then 10 million, and then your country. And the fact that Australia and Israel and places were doing things like this wasn't about COVID. It was about the government flexing on the citizens and telling them, this is now the new normal. These are the rules. These are the protocols. If you challenge us on it, we'll crack your head in and we'll arrest you. And they did. And it was sick. And that's why I blocked out most of 2021 in my mind because it was that bad. But never forget that we could always go back to this. And countries took notes and paid attention to what people said no, what people stood up, and what people just went along with the program because they just wanted it to end. And that was the majority of people. The vast majority of people just bent the knee and complied. And the governments that flexed on these people paid attention and realized how much they could get away with. And that's the scarier part of the whole thing. Okay, next reading. This is the last reading. Hopefully I've kept this under an hour, I don't know. This is page 168. Klaus takes us out with this passage. Despite all the precautions certain countries take to control the power of tech and limit surveillance, others are not so concerned. Some thinkers worry about how some of the quick choices we make today will influence our societies for years to come. The historian Yuval Noah Harari is one of them. In a recent article, he argues we'll have a fundamental choice to make between totalitarian surveillance and citizen empowerment. It's worth exposing his argument in detail. Quote, surveillance technology is developing at breakneck speed, and what seemed science fiction 10 years ago is today old news. As a thought experiment, consider a hypothetical government that demands that every citizen wears a biometric bracelet that monitors body temperature and heart rate 24 hours a day. The resulting data is hoarded and analyzed by government algorithm. The algorithms will know that you are sick even before you know it, and they will also know where you've been and who you met. The chains of infection could be drastically shortened and even cut altogether. Such a system could arguably stop the epidemic in tracks within days. Sounds wonderful, right? The downside is, of course, this would give legitimacy to a terrifying new surveillance system. If you know, for example, that I clicked on a Fox News link rather than a CNN link, that can teach you something about my political views and perhaps even my personality. But if you can monitor what happens to my body temperature, blood pressure, and heart rate as I watch the video clip, you can learn what makes me laugh, what makes me cry, what makes me really, really angry. It is crucial to remember that anger, joy, boredom, and love are biological phenomena just like fever and cough. The same technology that identifies coughs could also identify laughs. If corporations and governments start harvesting our biometric data en masse, they can get to know us far better than we know ourselves. And they can then not just predict our feelings, but also manipulate our feelings and sell us anything they want, be it a product or a politician. Biometric monitoring would make Cambridge Analytica's data hacking tactics look like something from the Stone Age. Imagine North Korea in 2030 when every citizen has to wear a biometric bracelet 24 hours a day. If you listen to a speech by the great leader and the bracelet picks up the telltale signs of anger, you are done for. Yeah. Yuval Noah Harari. He's a regular over there at the World Economic Forum. He is. Don't be fooled by that passage, right? He poses everything as a question. Imagine this, imagine that. Wouldn't it be scary? Wouldn't it be terrible if the great leader gave a speech and you were wearing a bracelet and it started to flash red because it sensed you have, a heart rate increase, meaning you were feeling anxious or angry? Then you'd be done for. Wouldn't that be awful? Yuval Noah Harari is 110% on board with a system just like that as he described. He wants you wearing a device, or having it better yet, he wants you having a device implanted surgically that you cannot remove that would register all that data. And the second you go near a Wi-Fi signal, it transmits it in real time to the data collection facility that processes it in an algorithm. But despite what he wants and despite what he says, it's already going on, right? Your smartphone is a data collection device. It's a transmitter, right? You use it to transmit things to your friends and your family. You use it to transmit orders, to Amazon or eBay or Etsy or what have you. Those transmissions are manual, but there are automatic transmissions going on every single day that you probably don't even know are happening, and you wouldn't even authorize if you knew better, right? Your camera it's two ways, right? This camera is on the back of my phone, and it can hear me and it can see me. The camera on the other side can see everything that's on the other side of the camera. Who's to say that camera can't be hijacked by Apple or somebody, a bad actor, and record your information, right? The things you say when you think no one's listening, right? The things you listen to when you think no one's around to see what you're watching or listening to. It will learn your deepest, darkest secrets. It will learn, like he said, what makes you mad, glad, gives you joy or anger, and everything in between. but your phone can be put down. It can be put in a Faraday bag and turned off. That is something that you voluntarily keep next to you as a transmitter. And I'm guilty of it as well. But he's talking about a bracelet or a device or an implantation that could give governments the ability to do that, and you would have no say over it because, well, it's the new normal. And that's just what we're going to have to do, because you don't want COVID-19 happening again. If we implant these things in you, we'll be able to know you're sick before you even show a symptom, which means if we quarantine you, you'll get better and you won't infect everybody. And COVID-19, the next COVID-19 rather, will be totally avoided. And you'll have helped us save humanity. All you have to do is give up your entire idea of what it means to have some privacy or personal autonomy. That's what this whole book is about. And I've figured it out. I'm 2/3 of the way through it. It's not about COVID. It's not about pandemics. That literally is just the opening act. It's the pandemic. It sets the stage for what Klaus Schwab and Yuval Noah Harari and the rest of the World Economic Forum wants to do. And that is top-down authoritarianism worldwide through technology, through economics, and through pharmaceuticals, through healthcare, through your money, through your health and your money. Your money, your health, and your infrastructure. Everything you rely upon for technology, right? You need tech, like your TV, your phone, everything's connected to it. Everybody I know uses Bluetooth and Wi-Fi on a daily basis, practically every day. If not, they're using 5G or LTE cell signal. You need the tech. You need money because that's how we exchange goods and services. And you need your health because without it, you're dead. The authoritarianism is going to come to you through those three things: through your tech reliance, through your healthcare, and through your economy. And that's the goal of the World Economic Forum. And the Great Reset is their vision to change your entire idea of what it means to be human and how the world works to a model that is more in line with what they think humanity should live and die by. And I couldn't disagree more. But anyway, I appreciate you hanging in there. If you're still here, you're troopers, as I said in the last episode, for going the whole the distance with me. We're going to wrap it up with part 4 of the Great Reset for COVID-19. And then we're going to jump into the last book, The Great Narrative, which I'm sure is also a real page turner. But anyway, if you could do us a favor, if you're liking the channel, I hope you are. I hope you're liking this series. Again, I apologize for all the time in between. But it takes time to read these things and put my thoughts together to do a video. So if you're liking it, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't yet already. Share it with family or friends who you think might get something out of it. And we'll see you back here for the conclusion of COVID-19, The Great Reset. Till then, be well, take care.